Yeah, okay, so I won't start chronologically. But I'm not sure if the internet says it like this, because in conversation with my father, he never mentioned Imvo Zabantsundu. But this is very much about Imvo Zabantsundu. Actually, I only connected these dots later that, one of the Jabavus is central to Imvo. So he was telling me about the Jabavus. There's JT Jabavu, then there's JT Jabavu's son, DDT Jabavu, then there's DDT Jabavu's daughter, Noni Jabavu, whom we should all know, by the way. Yeah, okay, so JT Jabavu is the founder of Imvo Zabantsundu. So all of this is happening in the late 19th and early 20th centuries in South Africa, in the Eastern Cape. Side note, it's really green there, by the way. So yeah, the newspaper, did I mention that Imvo Zabantsundu was a newspaper? It was founded in 1884.
For me, there's Desaline, Dede, Tessaline, and me. And many more characters besides that are part of the story. Tessaline is somewhere in the middle. She exists at the junction, not really at the center, where all these characters meet, merge, and clash. Every new body of work puts forward the tension that exists between these many points in the story, every time differently. And in this way, every time I work with Tessaline, she is born anew.
So, am I telling this too much like a story?
Just a bit.
Okay, so it's the colonial imposition of the British in the Eastern Cape, and the missionaries, or colonizers. They one and the same thing. They brought with them, amongst other problematic stuff, a missionary literary and printing influence. So there were tons of newspapers prior to 1884, but because J.T. Jabavu he came out of this missionary-educated elite of isiXhosa-speaking black folks, like middle-class vibes, playing piano and going overseas for studies in the late 1800s, etc. So JT, because of his educational background, then set out to establish the first, quote-unquote, black-owned, run, edited, and distributed newspaper by black folks, albeit funded with white capital. Think of it as a completely self-determined knowledge for us and by us. So that's why Imvo was so important, because for once, there was content that wasn't avoidant of socio-political happenings, and that wasn't sprinkled with a colonial missionary agenda.
You know, I say you tell it a bit too much like a story, but really, making it into a story, telling it as a story, makes it even more interesting to me. It's 1804. Desaline has brought forth the promise of the revolution. There are no longer masters on the land. There are no longer white people. Only Moon live here now. Only Haitians. So now it's the time to take care of Tutmun, of all Haitians. I'm interested in how that comes about and what it means. I'm interested in telling that story in my own way.
Yeah. Oh, Imvo Zabantsundu means, in English, the native's opinion. It was a way to firmly oppose the Christian missionary and religiously laden content, all written in isiXhosa. So I'm interested in this because J.T. Jabavu made a mistake, like big time. I think, well, the internet alludes to this. He was friends with some white politician colonial folk, and he was somehow convinced. Oh, we're in the early 1900s now, by the way. Somewhere there. Yeah, so they convinced him to sign a poll or a bill that was in favor of the 1913 Natives Land Act, which ultimately ended up dispossessing black South Africans from their own land for decades, you know? It was a lot.
In a very similar way to the creation of Imvo Zabantsundu. When I created Tessaline in 2015, it was also for the folks. Tessaline is built of parts of Many Moon and Desaline, made of the belief of Many Moon and mine. It's a way to ask the moon, do you remember this? My hat? Do you remember the sword? Do you see my horns? Do you see my teeth? My breast, my body? I'm starting a conversation with the people and with myself about memory and transmission of history and how we relate to it now. what we can get from it. Do people remember Imvoza Bansundu and what it represented in South Africa?
I think. I've been reading about it online. I was also reading somewhere that J.T. Jabavu was quoted to have said that he regretted that decision, I think. He was left with a tarnished reputation. So someone who was very much for the people, through the existence of this newspaper, ended up being part of something that was very much against the people. Do you think there's space in history to recall mistakes?
I think that when you gloss over events and facts, it's a mistake that people will have to deal with further down the line. As Black people, we have to deal with many blanks, many erasures when it comes to our presence in history, when it comes to the many mistakes we have been subjected to through times. Restituting these blanks, bringing them to light is very necessary. I'm interested in questioning people and things that happened, no matter how far or close back in time, and in thinking about what we make of them now. Dede, for example, the so-called crazy one, comes in 1806, and no one is quite certain anymore why Dede is the way she is. But she gathers the remains of Dessalines' body. The ruler has just been betrayed by many, but only Dede carries the burden to the cemetery to be buried. She's the only one with vision at this point, and maybe history remembers her as crazy for it. That is something that intrigues me.
Why is Dede important to you? How do you know about her, the part about lineage?
I'm a descendant of Dede. My mother told me that we were descendants of Dede. On my mother's side, that's how she put it. And that is how I like to think of this lineage, as an affair of women, from one mother to another. I like to think about how many mothers it takes to reach that one African mother. That got me started with thinking about what other personal connections I could have with history, and with Dessalines in particular. How about you? What place does Imvoza Bansundu occupy in your practice?
Info functions as a footnote, a reminder. In the complexities of knowledge production, it is also possible to be counterproductive. That production could be ignorant, that production could be wrong. Before I was looking at knowledge production in a more linear way, and now I think I'm looking at it with a bit more depth.
And despite Jite's mistake, do you admire the Jabavus?
I like Noni Jabavu. She became a novelist, I think 1950s or 60s, and she was the first, quote-unquote, Black woman editor of this magazine in the UK called The New Strand. Yeah, so that's also quite interesting. This literary blood, it's in their lineage. So there's this generational jump.
But would you want to place yourself in that lineage? Do you consider it something of an intellectual inheritance?
Nah, I think I'm good, hey? I'm alright at a distance. I'm alright, not in between.
I think you get to choose. And that is the whole point of my practice. That you get to tell the story however you want it to be. You create new connections, new affiliations. Thinking about Dede now, thinking about the way I can establish this link, a parallel between what she did, gathering the remains of Dessalines' body, and what I do in taking all these pieces of history and making them into something new. Whenever I consider a new idea, I immediately try integrating it into what already is, trying to make sense of things in a new way. And maybe in my story now, Dede is Dessalines' twin mother, just like I am Dessalines' mother self. And you can wonder about how many daughters it takes to get to a character like Dessalines. Maybe you should call me Tete. In this new and true story, I've once again gathered the remains of a vision for the future, the same as my ancestor did before me.